Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me along today. And welcome to London. It's not my home, but it's a place that I'll be calling home for the next few years. You're very, very welcome, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak to you today. Thanks to Mark for that lovely introduction there. I'm actually coming to you very, very early in my career in the House of Commons. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak here. I was only elected as a Member of Parliament 2 months ago. And before I was elected, obviously, I'd worked overseas, and Mark ran through some of the areas, and worked in the former Soviet Union and in the Western Balkans as well. So I don't need to be able to run through that again. But I think as a new MP, the first thing that I'm doing is learning. And it's really important for me to listen and learn a little bit more about your work, and also take on board some of my previous experiences. We've just gone... Let me give you a little bit of political context to where I'm coming from, because as a new Member of Parliament, there was obviously a little bit of political context that might be helpful to you. I know there are delegates here from every continent in the world, so it's something that I wouldn't expect you to know about. I'm a member of the Scottish National Party, or the party largely based in Scotland. We went from a situation of having just 6 MPs prior to the election to having 56 MPs, and that's out of a possible of 59 MPs in Scotland. That's, if you like, the Scottish delegation to the House of Commons. So we as a party, and I as an individual, have gone through an extraordinary journey over the past little while. And this is the biggest change for a single party in the House of Commons for about a century, I think. So we are learning, the House of Commons are learning, our colleagues in the other political parties are learning as well. So please bear with me as we sort of find our way through this period. The reason why we had this big change is that, and this is quite an important point that I wanted to illustrate to you all today, is that Scotland's just gone through its independence referendum last year. And what's notable about, I know we're here to talk about more, I want to talk about cultural diplomacy in terms of good governance, but I think it would be remiss of me not to talk about the political journey that I've been on and that my compatriots have been on in Scotland. My party has been a party of government in Scotland for over 8 years now, but we're seen a little bit down here as an insurgent, as a new party in many ways. So it's a kind of unusual situation to be in. But we've just come through a remarkable period. We had an independence referendum where people felt very, very strongly over whether the country should be independent or should remain as part of the United Kingdom. Now, obviously, I'm in favour of, my party colleagues are in favour of independence and Scotland taking its place in the family of nations, but I have great respect for my colleagues in all the other parties who argued a different way. A huge part of that journey, and the reason why we were able to have what was a very passionate debate in a peaceful and democratic manner, a lot of that goes to the heart of cultural diplomacy. I'll give you an example. Just talk about the democratic journey that we enjoyed. Last summer, Scotland was a remarkable place to be. Family and friends and lots of groups were discussing and debating the future of the country with very valid points on both sides. Every organisation, from the churches, trade unions, individual groups, every small village across the country had its own yes group or its no group, and so communities were discussing, weren't arguing, they were discussing amongst themselves. Musicians and other artists were having a very significant contribution to the future of the country as well. In fact, in many ways, and I say this as somebody who, of course, is a politician, in many ways the politicians took a back seat from that. And we ended up, in the end, having a turnout of 86%, which in a Western European democratic country is a significant turnout, especially in a time when democratic participation is going down the way rather than up the way. I wanted to talk about that because that's something that gives an important context about where I am as an individual politician and where politics, where I come from, is at the moment. We went through that very passionate debate without so much as a bloody nose or without so much as a fist fight. There may be a few friendships that needed mended on the other end, but that was where we got to. A large part of that was because of the leadership of civic society and the leadership of cultural organisations as well, drawing from every faith group in Scotland and every one of our different ethnicities who all drew together as Scots to have that very, very passionate debate. I'm proud of the role that everybody in Scotland played, and I know that there are people who are organised in here. I think Lord McConnell, for instance, who would have been on the other side from me in that debate, for whom I have a great amount of respect, and made some very, very good arguments in favour of retaining the Union, and I made others in favour of independence. One thing that won't change for us now, though, and this takes me on to the body of what I'd like to talk to you about, is that one of my arguments for Scotland being independent was to retake our place in the family of nations. International outreach, whether people voted yes or no, and on all sides of political discourse at the House of Commons, this is a really important time for cultural diplomacy. The reason it's an important time is that we're facing challenges around the world, and we're facing challenges in international outreach that we've never had before. I mean, 20 years ago or so, we maybe had a very straightforward sense of the West and the Soviet bloc or the communist bloc and the rest of the world. I oversimplify, but I think that goes to the heart of where we are just now, is in this multipolar, very complicated world, but which is more interconnected than at any other time in our history. I'm looking around, and I suspect there are people from various countries around the world who are able to contact your friends and family this evening, or when you walk out the room, or while I'm speaking if you're not listening properly as well. That's something that you're able to do. But it's brought us new challenges. But with these new challenges, I think that some of the institutions that we have already can be worked in, and cultural diplomacy has a role to work within them. This summer's marking 70 years since the end of the Second World War. And it's in the Second World War that many of the organisations that were formed then, or the period that started forming them, began. If you look at the United Nations, for instance, which was formed in 1945, its first General Assembly meeting was just across the road from the Houses of Parliament in the Methodist Church Hall, had its first General Assembly in 1946. The United Nations, there's no question about it, is flawed. But if you look at the institutions, including the institutions here, it provides us an opportunity for the exchange of ideas and to talk to one another. And that's perhaps been the most important legacy of the United Nations, and it's something that's worth remembering, because having that institution through which we can talk to one another allows us to build for peace. Another institution, if you like, that followed from the Second World War and the end of the British Empire came through the Commonwealth. I'm still a huge fan of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth brings together a third of the world's population. It brings together countries with a difficult but common history, who are able to exchange cultural ideas and political ideas, who are able to talk to one another and share that history. Now, that history was not always an easy history. Nobody would ever argue that history was an easy history, but allows an exchange of views. Last year, Glasgow in Scotland was brought alive by the Commonwealth Games that took part there. And that was an absolutely fantastic way to have that jamboree of sport and culture coming together, and was a hugely spectacularly important event. Which leads me to talk about briefly Scotland again, because it was held in Scotland, a member of the Commonwealth. And in Scotland, another area where we've had this cultural exchange has been, and I say this to everybody from any country, this is a valuable resource in an interchangeable world, is that through your diaspora. Now, we Scots have diasporas that go throughout the Commonwealth: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa. I'm going to Namibia this weekend, and I'm even told that there's a diaspora there. And the governing party and SWAPO have fond memories of spending time in Scotland in their times of exile. But even beyond the Commonwealth, in countries like the United States, obviously, but in less obvious countries. I noticed that there were Scottish missionaries went to Georgia. I was speaking to them when I lived there. And of course, we had the cultural exchange through the words of the poetry of Robert Burns, which was a very important way for me to make connections with people as well. So use your diaspora, and the Commonwealth has been valuable for that. I'm not sure where the Commonwealth is going over the next 50 years. It has changed a lot, and it will continue to change a lot. And that leads me on to the final point. I'm the Europe spokesperson for my political party, and it would be remiss of me not to talk about the European Union. I know that there'll be people here who are not members about the European Union, but let me just talk about it briefly, because it is an important lesson to the rest of the world. The European Union has many flaws, but what it has done is that it needs to be given credit for the way that we have built peace, prosperity and stability in Europe. These are not words that were associated with Europe prior to 1945. In fact, Europe had a very, very difficult history. The European Union was able to build peace, prosperity, stability, and even at the fall of the Soviet Union, it was able to make to outreach as well, bringing in many of the countries of Eastern Europe. It has its flaws, it has its problems, but it's achieved that, and we should give it due credit for achieving that as well. We're about to debate our relationship with the European Union. I think there are flaws. There are areas like public health that should maybe be brought back. Having fishing policy in the European Union is not a great idea. And having the two-seat parliament, they go from Brussels to Strasbourg, not a great idea. But when I look at the areas we should be working together and talking to one another, I think of areas like climate change. No country on its own can tackle the benefits and opportunities posed by climate change. No country can... we should come together and talk about social Europe and trying to have a more socially cohesive Europe. And fundamentally, it provides us an opportunity to deal with the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War in the Mediterranean, with Europe trying to reassess its relationship with the Russian Federation and elsewhere in the East, and it provides that opportunity. But the most important thing that it's allowed us to do is it has allowed us to talk to one another even where we disagree with each other. It has allowed us to have the exchange of cultural ideas. And I look forward to debates over the next little while, because the UK is going to have a referendum about whether we stay in or we leave the European Union. And I hope it's like the Scottish independence referendum. I hope we can have an open debate. I hope that cultural organisations and civic society will play that important role in terms of the exchange of ideas and play the same role that they played in Scotland in our European referendum. The critical thing for me is, and should always be, that we should never ever be afraid of the exchange of ideas. Cultural diplomacy gives people the opportunity to talk about things and talk with people they may never have the opportunity. Having that talk and trying to understand the other point of view is absolutely critical. So you're trying to understand the other point of view and also trying to understand somebody else's culture. And if you're able to do that, then you can kind of have the kind of peaceful debate that we were able to have in Scotland last summer that led to a huge amount of citizen engagement. This is a problem that's facing every country throughout the world. How do people who are political elites and, I dare say, cultural elites make your work relevant to people? So we've maybe had a successful 70 years. I think the European Union is in a good place, the Commonwealth is in a good place, and the United Nations is in a good place. But in terms of taking our world forward, I think it's vital that we have that exchange, and that's where you have a really important role to play in pushing the boundaries and bringing forward new ideas in a respectful way, so that we can always have a debate that is respectful and peaceful, and that's the only way to take things forward. I try to keep things short because I'm keen more than anything else, because it's a warm afternoon to take any questions.
Excellent, Stefan. That's excellent. What you said, of course. We take 2 questions from the audience. Please, it has to be the question be short, please. Any questions? Any questions? Give him a hard question. He's a member of parliament. He can handle it.
I'm quite happy with no questions, but please feel free.
Give him some question.
In your role within the House of Commons Select Committee for Foreign Affairs,
Yeah.
how are you actively promoting human rights?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. This is something, actually, in the Foreign Affairs Committee, it's obviously a select committee of the House of Commons, and I only attended my first meeting last week, so you're putting me on the spot already. But I've been fortunate because there's some members with a great deal more knowledge than I do. With human rights, what we do is that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office from the United Kingdom produces a human rights report. And it is our job on the Foreign Affairs Committee to scrutinise that report and ask the Foreign Secretary and the other ministers, are they doing it? Do we think they're doing enough to promote human rights around the world? It's not our job to look at human rights in the United Kingdom. That would be more the Justice and Home Affairs Department. But we will scrutinise that department, because the United Kingdom has said that we have a role in promoting human rights around the world, and it is my job as a member of a committee to scrutinise that, to give them credit where they're doing a good job, but also to call into question where we don't think they're doing enough. There's a particular debate here around the European Convention of Human Rights. I think the European Convention of Human Rights is overall, which was a convention that was written by English lawyers with some help from Scots lawyers in the aftermath of the Second World War. I think that's a gold standard in terms of conventions for human rights, and I hope the UK doesn't withdraw. So we'll also have a role to play in looking at how that is still applicable and to hopefully keep the United Kingdom inside that as well. Because if the United Kingdom is going to tell people about human rights around the world, it needs to make sure that it is doing the best job it possibly can domestically.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My question is,
Yes, I think.
That's it.
so what is the contribution of UK government to promote peace through cultural diplomacy to the Commonwealth?
I'm not entirely sure. But I think that what it does is that the UK government, rather than promoting, it works with partners in the Commonwealth on a bilateral level. But the other thing that's quite important that the UK government does is the UK government obviously gives some funding to the Commonwealth. And the reason I think that's important is that the UK government can promote cultural diplomacy, and it does through its network of embassies and consulates throughout the world. But I think it's important for the Commonwealth, and the way it does it through the Commonwealth is also to allow the Commonwealth as a freestanding organisation to promote cultural as well. So I think it's more financial help that the UK got, and an active participation in the Commonwealth as well.
Yes. Just one more question, the last one.
I'm happy to take two, and I'll answer them very quickly. I could take.
No problem, because there is no time.
Sir, what is your party's view with respect to the recent agreement with Iran over the nuclear issue? And do you think that cultural diplomacy played a role in arriving at this decision?
My party's argument would be one that we should be pursuing rapprochement with Iran. Iran is such a hugely important country regionally, and such a rich country as well. So I would hope that this opens the doors. It's where cultural diplomacy really has a big role to play. Iran, which is such a rich country and a rich cultural country from its Persian past to its current day, is a remarkable country. I know from my time in the Caucasus the impressive role that the Iranians have had to play there. And I think this is where cultural diplomacy can go places where political diplomacy can't. There are sometimes restrictions on political diplomacy, and that provides an opportunity for cultural diplomacy. And the Iranian agreement would not have been possible if it hadn't been for the groundwork of cultural diplomacy. I think that's something that people like me have to recognise. Yes,
so
sir.
My question is that what you say about the future of the European Union? Just we see that Greece is economically down, and UK is not use the euro, and also in the European Union. If is it possible UK can use the euro in the future?
I don't think it's the right time for the UK to use the euro. I think the European Union, I think we should stay in, and that's why I mentioned we should make a very positive case for remaining in. If you're going to have, there needs to be reform. If you're going to have reform, that means powers back to the member states. But I think there's also room for more powers in the European Union on security policy and climate change policy, for instance. But the big thing the European Union has to do, and the member states have the bigger role to play in this, is to make the European Union relevant to the citizens. And I'm not sure we've done a good job of that so far. And you mentioned Greece, and that's critical for Greece, because I think that with all the pressure onto the Greek government, the European Union or the member states are failing to show proper solidarity with the people of Greece at the moment. And I think that's something that we need to think about as well as we talk about the future. But I know that I took two questions. It was very selfish of me, but...
For the Honourable MP, Mr. Gethins, member of the British Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you for having me along. Thank you.